Hi, Story Wilson with RSWSolutions.com. This is a 2012 L322 full-size Range Rover. So, today we're going to look at some of the symptoms associated with front air suspension failure, leaks in the front air springs. Very common. For some reason, the struts in the front tend to leak over time, somewhere between 5 to 7 years, 70,000 to 90,000 miles. These front air springs are going to start leaking, and they're going to need to be replaced before they go into a full catastrophic failure. Now, the rears, for some reason, tend not to leak very often. Eventually they will, of course. Their construction is a bit different. The rear is a completely separate gas strut and air spring, whereas the front is a combined air spring and strut design. And that design tends to leak. I think the O-rings around the strut begin to leak, and you'll see the design is quite a bit complicated in the front. So what you'll notice in the front is when you come to start your vehicle in the morning, or perhaps on a Monday morning after it's been sitting all weekend, you'll notice the rear has dropped a little bit, and when you start the car it'll raise up just in the front. You'll notice the air compressor running more often than it normally does, especially right after that first morning startup. And we'll go over the fault codes associated with leaking air springs. So right now let's go into the vehicle. Let's read the fault codes with the 4D software tool and see the faults associated with leaking front air springs.
Checking for faults on the air suspension computer is a fairly straightforward task, and what we're going to do to verify our suspicion is we noticed that one of the corners in the vehicle tends to drop a little bit. There's a lot of height corrections, especially on startup in the morning. So we're going to interrogate the air suspension computer. Now, you may already have faults on your vehicle dash saying air suspension inactive, and this will also work in the same regard. We can query the air suspension computer and we can find out what's going on. But I have my suspicions that we may have triggered a fault. You can trigger faults without actually having a warning sign on the dash. So we're going to use the 4D software tool manufactured by RSW Solutions to work with this 2010 to 2012 model year Land Rover. The 4D tool also functions with earlier Land Rovers from 2005 to 2009 LR3s, basically working with all of the Ford manufactured Land Rovers. And again, this is the RSW Solutions 4D tool. So it uses either a USB or a Wi-Fi L322 device. So we're going to use a Wi-Fi device today. The Wi-Fi device is plugged into the vehicle. We are connected to the OBD2 Wi-Fi network that the device creates. The vehicle key is in the second position. We're going to establish connectivity with the Wi-Fi device and wait for a return. We have a return down here, an L327 Wi-Fi device. We're going to go to the 2010 onward Land Rover modules. We're going to read the faults on the air suspension module. And it's pretty simple. You'll open communications, wait for the communication sequence to begin. Now we're ready to read the faults, read faults, and we have faults in the air suspension computer. You can close the diagnostic session. We have air spring air supply signal has too many transitions or events. And what this is saying is that the air supply algorithms in the air suspension computer, when it decides to send air to the air springs, there's a problem there. And the more specific sub-event is that the signal has too many transitions. So what this is saying is that the air suspension ECU has had to send air to the air springs too many times, meaning that there's a leak. It's saying that the air suspension has an abnormally high amount or high number of events where it's had to send air to the air springs. And this is one of the classic fault codes you'll see with an air spring leak. Now, I hope that makes sense. It's basically there's a leak in the air spring, and the air suspension ECU has had to put air into that air spring too many times. Now, it doesn't specify what corner of the vehicle has the fault, Eventually, if we were to leave this condition the way it is, eventually that air spring would develop a catastrophic air leak, and then we'd be able to visually see what corner of the vehicle has the air leak, and we probably throw a fault as well, specifying that corner. Now, I know that it's in the front. The fronts typically go. I've also seen it's the front right corner that tends to dip a little bit. It's always, for some reason, one of the corners dips a little bit more than the other. You have to be quick, though, to catch it. Now, I've been fortunate to have a good relationship with R air suspension products, and I've got 2 front air springs for the L322 Range Rover model year 2010 to 2012. And now we're going to go ahead and replace those air springs next. I typically replace air springs as a pair. I know they're expensive, but I always replace them as a pair, the front pairs or the rear pairs, just because you know that if the front right is going, the front left is probably going to go pretty soon as well. So in the next video, we've got this information. The 4D CAN tool has told us that we indeed do have a problem with the air springs, and knowing that, I can then form a plan to replace those air springs. There's no reason to wait till they fail. I mean, it's really just a terrible idea to wait till they fail. It's going to ruin your day or your week. It's best to find these faults and then make a plan of action before the system goes into complete failure mode. And also, if you wait until you go into complete failure mode, you're also more likely to do damage to other components in the vehicle, either the air suspension components like the compressor having to work too much, or just the vehicle itself having to drive around in an emergency situation with no air suspension. So I hope this helps. In the next video, we're going to go over the steps to replace the air springs. Thanks for watching, and again, this is the RSW Solutions 4D CAN tool.